Okay, here we go. Boss fights. That thing that happens with the big health bar and the explosion. You know, that pivotal point in your hero's journey where you mercilessly beat someone to a pulp. I'm just joking. Hitting someone at a normal amount of times only for them to explode and loot is an amazing spectacle, and it's educational. Boss fights are a staple for most genres in the video game industry, even in games where there isn't a quote-unquote boss to really fight. Whether it be a villain that you've been pursuing or a one-off monstrosity, boss fights are meant to be important in one way or another. Enter the roguelike. Roguelite? Alright, hold on. Roguelike is a subgenre characterized by procedurally generated levels and permanent death of the player character. But a roguelite has similar execution, except the player gets to bring something with them. Except that's wrong? Using upgrades in games like these is confusing because technically the use of currency to forward the power of the character is a way to progress that you couldn't before, but also the progression that's worked presumably is accomplishing something that you got during the run, but sometimes it's an option, but the options change with every game. Alright, we're done. Back to the description that's relevant. The goal is to fight and die over and over until you become engrossed enough with the game's wide variety of mechanics to beat all the bosses and hopefully reach the end. The way these games do their boss fights works perfectly with the type of well-warranted gameplay that they entail, just like other games, with a multitude of nail-biting crazy monsters that some people may have had a harder time getting capture for. There are other ways to game structure boss fights like Breath of the Wild, with mini bosses spread throughout the game that you can take on at your own pace with the structured main villain boss fight that you're always working towards, and, finally, more structured story games like Bioshock or Animal Crossing, because in the beginning of the game there's a singular main bad guy that you harbor a deep vengeance for and will undoubtedly brutally murder. Now the reason I bring up all these different ways that games can structure boss fights is to highlight the unique ways that these structures are used to enhance the game in any tonal or mechanical way the game's developers want them to. If we swapped Breath of the Wild and Slay the Spire's way of including boss fights into their respective genres, obviously they would be different games for better or for worse. An open world game is meant to leave you with your options open, and a roguelike/light is meant to maintain the player's forward momentum. So now that we talked about how the placement of boss fights reflects the structure of the game, now it's time for us to get into the heart-pounding, button-mashing, anger-inducing good stuff. But who could possibly replay the beginnings of a bunch of different games just to get the feel of how a boss fight affects and foreshadows the game's tone, and more importantly, get more character to use to help explain their coddled together ramblings because they still haven't figured out how fair use works when it comes to other people's gameplay footage? It's me, I have to do it. Introduced as lost souls, our heroes are met with horrors around every corner of their world. Locked into a battle much greater than themselves, the player becomes conscious of their foes. They would have to be determined for them to save the world, all on their own. One going deeper into danger, the other trying to escape it. Our heroes have a different yet similar problem. Presented with a long journey ahead, our first real encounter covers the screen with danger. One personal and one appropriately absurd, these fights and future ones will be well memorized. Now before I come to my summary, I feel I have to at least mention my thoughts on how games present their final boss fights. So, let's make this quick. As stated before, the nature of boss fights and how they are used are representative of the genre of the game being played. But in any game, when a boss fight has some major consequence and or risk involved, especially ones that directly relate to the characters or their ambitions, you could say there's a lot more well-deserved pomp and circumstance. Enter, the king of all those things and more, the final boss fight. The only time where you will actually consider using all those items you got before falling back on the tactics you've been using throughout the entire playthrough. Major spectacles, character growth, and a general sense of finality. The final boss fight of a game should be something to behold because it truly is the thing you've been working towards. Your hardships realized as one glorious punching bag. And, with the end of it, so too ends the game. Unless it's a new game plus, or it's an open world game. Whatever. You get my meaning. So, to summarize, in my opinion, the best boss fights are unique encounters meant to present the most important aspects of the game in a way that is related to the gameplay of that game. Also, depending on how many times you die, you can directly calculate how much of your humanity has been lost to Dark Souls. I meant to say Dark Souls. Sorry! I'm trying to say Dark Souls.